Imagine a flickering fire, the stench of stale ale, the scent of damp wool, and a stranger's snore inches from your face. Welcome to a medieval inn. To truly step inside, I urge you to watch at 1.25x speed. Let the pace draw you deeper into a world both alien and uncannily familiar. What was it truly like to sleep shoulder to shoulder with a stranger who might rob you by dawn? How did a single inn, a humble way station on a dusty road, shape the fate of entire towns, connecting disparate lives and far-flung kingdoms? Could you survive a night in a place where the stew was as mysterious as the guests who shuffled in and out? Tonight, we peel back the layers of romanticized history, leaving behind the gleaming, sanitized images of fantasy. We journey into the gritty, vibrant, and often dangerous reality of medieval inns. We'll uncover not just their squalid truths but their profound, human heart. Prepare to be surprised, perhaps a little disgusted, and ultimately, deeply moved. By the end, you'll see these humble buildings not as mere shelters, but as crucial arteries in the pulsing body of the medieval world. The threshold of a medieval inn was a portal, a chaotic symphony for the senses. Step inside, and you were immediately assaulted by a wall of smells, not always pleasant, but undeniably alive. The earthy aroma of damp straw mingled with the sharp tang of wood smoke, the sweet, yeasty scent of brewing ale, and the ever-present, sometimes unsettling, odor of unwashed bodies. This wasn't the sterile environment of a modern hotel, this was life, raw and unfiltered. The first challenge? Finding sustenance that wouldn't send you to an early grave. Food and drink were the inn's lifeblood, but quality was a gamble. You'd hope for a hearty stew, thick with root vegetables and perhaps a dubious cut of meat, served with coarse bread. But often, what you got was less than appetizing. Imagine a weary pilgrim, Elias, his feet swollen from weeks on the road to Canterbury. He pushes open the heavy oak door, his stomach rumbling. The air inside is thick with the scent of cabbage and something vaguely meaty. He sees a long trestle table, groaning under pewter plates and tankards. He's desperate, not for a gourmet meal, but for calories, for warmth. He pays for a bowl of stew, the broth murky, the meat unidentifiable. His heart sinks, realizing safety was a luxury even gold couldn't buy, and a full stomach was no guarantee of health. Yet, he eats. Because what choice did he have? Inns weren't just about feeding hungry bellies, they were about providing a crucial, if often unregulated, service. Ale, not water, was the drink of choice, safer, and often more nourishing due to the brewing process. But even ale was subject to fraud. Innkeepers were frequently fined for watering down their ale or selling it in unmarked containers. This wasn't just minor deception, it was a breach of trust in a society utterly dependent on these establishments. Imagine the outrage, the arguments that must have erupted over a pint that was more water than barley, the medieval equivalent of a bad Yelp review, but with the added risk of a fist fight. The food, too, was a lottery. Meat was often salted or smoked to preserve it, but sanitation standards were, to put it mildly, rudimentary. Leftovers might be repurposed, and fresh produce was seasonal. You'd be lucky to get a hot meal, and luckier still if it didn't give you the dreaded flux later. Yet, for many, this was the only option. Merchants, like Thomas, a cloth merchant from London, would eye his trencher warily. He carried his fortune, his reputation, and his life in his saddlebags. He needed his wits about him. A bad meal could mean days of incapacitation, a missed market, ruin. He'd learned to ask questions, to watch the innkeeper's hands, to gauge the freshness of the bread. Survival was an art form. How did travelers cope? They learned to be discerning, to gravitate towards inns with good reputations, pass by word of mouth along the dusty trade routes. They might carry their own dried provisions, hardtack, cheese, cured meat, as a backup. And they learned to be resourceful. A good innkeeper, however, understood their vital role. Agnes, a formidable woman who ran the Gilded Griffin in Winchester, knew her reputation was her currency. She ensured her ale was strong and her stew was hearty, even if the meat was occasionally sourced from less than ideal circumstances. Her kitchen, though smoky, was meticulously maintained by her standards, her pots scrubbed, her fires stoked. She understood that a traveler with a satisfied stomach was a traveler who would return, and more importantly, speak well of her establishment. For all its grime and occasional deception, the inn's kitchen was a place of alchemy. It transformed humble ingredients into sustenance, and in doing so, it sustained lives. For Elias, the pilgrim, that questionable stew wasn't just food, it was warmth, a brief respite from the biting wind, a flicker of hope that he would reach his destination. For Thomas, the merchant, it was the fuel for another day of negotiations, another step towards securing his future. The shared meal, however humble, forged a temporary bond amongst strangers, a silent acknowledgement of their shared vulnerability in a harsh world. Have you ever been so hungry, so exhausted, that any food, no matter how dubious, felt like a feast? Share your story in the comments, we read every one. You've eaten your fill, or at least enough to quiet the gnawing hunger. Now, the biggest hurdle of all, sleep. Forget individual rooms with fluffy pillows and pristine sheets. In a medieval inn, privacy was a luxury only the wealthiest could afford, and even then, it was relative. The common sleeping arrangement, particularly in smaller inns or for less affluent travelers, was the communal bedchamber. Imagine a vast room, perhaps with a straw-strewn floor, filled with rows of standing beds, crude frames often filled with straw or rough wool. Here, you would share a bed, not just with a spouse or a friend, but with total strangers. A weary merchant, a boisterous miller, a silent friar, and perhaps even a pregnant woman, all piled onto one large mattress, their bodies a tapestry of snores, coughs, and rustles. The sheer lack of personal space, the intimacy forced upon disparate souls, was a fundamental challenge to both comfort and safety. This was not just about the discomfort, it was about vulnerability. How do you guard your purse, your dignity, your very life, when a stranger's hand is inches from your face? Consider a young woman, Ilara, who works in the inn's kitchens, her hands raw from scrubbing pots, her back aching from lifting heavy buckets. When her shift ends, she retreats to a corner of the common sleeping chamber, a small, worn blanket her only comfort. She doesn't share a bed with strangers in the same way, but her private space is merely a curtained-off nook in a bustling room. She hears everything, the whispered conversations, the drunken ramblings, the anxious sighs of travelers far from home. Her privacy is a thin veil. She longs for a moment of true solitude, a place where she can simply be herself, away from the constant scrutiny and the ever-present threat of intrusion. Her quiet dignity is a shield against the ceaseless chaos. This communal sleeping arrangement wasn't just a quirk of medieval life, it was an economic necessity and a social norm. Inns maximized their capacity by cramming as many bodies as possible into a single room. For the innkeeper, it was a practical way to earn more. For the traveler, it was often the only option between harsh weather and dangerous roads. But this closeness also facilitated unexpected connections. These shared spaces fostered a unique form of temporary community. For one night, a merchant and a pilgrim, despite their vastly different stations, shared a bed and perhaps a dream of a better tomorrow. This forced proximity, while unsettling, also bred a strange form of camaraderie, a shared understanding of their collective journey. Hygiene, or the lack thereof, was another stark reality. Bed bugs were reliable company, as common as the straw in the mattress. Lice, fleas, these were facts of life. Travelers often slept in their clothes, further exacerbating the issue. And what about calls of nature? A chamber pot might be available, but often, travelers simply relieved themselves outside, adding to the general miasma around the inn. Archaeological digs at medieval inn sites, such as those that have unearthed primitive drainage systems or cesspits, offer a grim but accurate glimpse into the challenges of waste management in these crowded spaces. It wasn't pretty, but it was functional, in its own way. Travelers developed coping mechanisms. Some carried their own small, foldable mattresses or blankets. Many kept their valuables securely hidden, often in a small pouch tied to their bodies. Those with more means might pay extra for a private room, though private often meant simply a smaller, partitioned space within the inn, still subject to noise and smells from the common areas. The innkeeper, meanwhile, had to manage this delicate balance of bodies. They often tried to group travelers by perceived status or perceived safety, though this was far from an exact science. Yet, despite the discomfort, the common sleeping hall was also a place of shared stories, whispered secrets, and sometimes, unexpected friendships forged in the dark. The lack of privacy in a medieval inn was a stark reminder of life's precariousness. Yet, within that shared space, something profoundly human emerged. It was a space where the barriers of social class could momentarily blur, where the farmer and the knight, the merchant and the minstrel, were all equally vulnerable, equally exposed to the elements and to each other. It speaks to a resilience, a capacity for adaptation that is hard for us, with our modern comforts, to truly grasp. Have you ever been pushed so far out of your comfort zone that you found a surprising strength within yourself? Tell us your story in the comments. After the discomfort of sleep, the inn sprang back to life with a different kind of energy, the ebb and flow of revelry, juxtaposed with the ever-present threat of danger. Inns were not just places to eat and sleep, they were vital social hubs, stages for the human drama to unfold. Entertainment in a medieval inn was raw, spontaneous, and sometimes violent. Minstrels might play, storytellers spin tales of heroes and villains, and dice might be thrown with abandon. But with revelry came risk. Drunken brawls were common. Theft was a constant threat, especially with so many strangers gathered in one place, their possessions often unsecured. And then there were the more insidious dangers, con artists, highwaymen casing their next victims, or even spies gathering intelligence. The very atmosphere that provided solace could also become a trap. Consider Bartholomew, a traveling minstrel, his lute worn smooth from countless journeys. He arrives at an inn, his stomach empty, his purse lighter than he'd like. He plays for his supper, his fingers dancing across the strings, weaving tales of love and loss. He sees the rough faces of the patrons, some hardened by the road, others softened by ale. He knows that among them could be a kind benefactor or a ruthless cutthroat. His humor, his wit, his very performance, is his shield, his currency. He tells a bawdy joke, watches the laughter erupt, and for a moment, he feels safe, connected. But even as he plays, he keeps one eye on his small pouch, one ear attuned to the whispers that could spell trouble. His life, literally, depended on his ability to read the room. Inns served as crucial information networks. Travelers exchanged news, rumors, and gossip, making them vital communication hubs in a pre-internet world. Many inns in Central Europe served as official postal relays, where letters and messages were exchanged and riders rested before continuing their journey. This highlights their immense economic and cultural impact. But this free flow of information also meant a free flow of misinformation and the presence of unsavory characters. The line between entertainment and danger was often razor-thin. A seemingly friendly game of dice could quickly escalate into a violent dispute over cheating. A casual conversation could be a probing for information. Beyond the human element, inns faced literal risks. Fire was a constant dread. Many inns were constructed primarily of wood and straw, making them highly combustible. A dropped ember, an overturned candle, could engulf an entire establishment in minutes. This is why many medieval towns had strict fire regulations, and why innkeepers often had designated fire-watching duties. Food safety was also a critical issue. While some regulations existed, enforcement was inconsistent. A traveler with a weak stomach might spend the night not in revelry, but in agony. Travelers developed strategies for navigating these risks. They formed temporary alliances with fellow travelers, pooling resources and strength. They kept their weapons close, if they had them. They learned to read faces, to trust their instincts about who to engage with and who to avoid. Innkeepers, meanwhile, often employed bouncers or strong-arm men to maintain order, especially in larger urban inns. They knew that a reputation for safety was as important as a reputation for good ale. Some inns even had specific rooms for gambling or prostitution, attempting to compartmentalize the more volatile aspects of their business. It was a crude form of crowd control, but it was essential for survival. The medieval inn, with its blend of music and mayhem, laughter and lurking danger, was a microcosm of medieval society itself. It was a place where life was lived loudly, where joy and sorrow mingled, and where the human spirit, in all its complexity, was on full display. It shows us that even in the absence of modern comforts and regulations, humanity found ways to connect, to seek joy, and to survive. The stew might have been questionable, but at least the bed bugs were reliable company, and the stories shared were often priceless. Can you imagine a world where your safety and your entertainment were so deeply intertwined? While the chaos of an inn often felt unbridled, there were, in fact, rules, often unwritten, sometimes enforced by a weary innkeeper, and occasionally backed by the law. These regulations, however rudimentary, attempted to bring a semblance of order to these vibrant, volatile spaces. The primary problem for both travelers and innkeepers was maintaining order and preventing crime. With so many strangers, often carrying valuables, crime was endemic. Highwaymen frequently used inns as places to gather intelligence on potential targets, or even to dispose of stolen goods. Pickpockets thrived in the crowded common rooms. And internal disputes, often fueled by drink, could turn deadly. The innkeeper, the supposed arbiter of peace, was constantly walking a tightrope between welcoming guests and protecting his livelihood. Imagine a cunning innkeeper, Master Geoffrey. He's seen it all: brawls, scams, even a quiet murder once. He moves through his establishment like a shadow, his eyes missing nothing. He knows the local rogues by sight, and he has a network of informants among the stable boys and chambermaids. He enforces his own brand of justice, a heavy hand, a sharp tongue, and sometimes a discreet warning to troublesome guests. He knows that his reputation, his very existence, depends on maintaining a fragile peace. He watches a group of rough-looking men huddle in a corner, their voices low. His gut clenches. He's seen this before. He sends his most trusted server, a young woman named Isolde, to casually clear their table, to listen, to gather any scrap of information. His survival isn't about grand gestures, it's about constant vigilance, about managing the subtle currents of human nature. Medieval urban inns, particularly in larger towns, were often subject to local ordinances. These might dictate opening and closing hours, the price of ale and bread, or even require innkeepers to report suspicious guests to the local authorities. This wasn't just about safety, it was also about taxation and control. However, enforcement was often lax, and corruption was rife. Many innkeepers operated in a grey area, turning a blind eye to minor illicit dealings in exchange for a quiet night, or perhaps a share of the spoils. The role of women in these establishments was crucial and often overlooked. Women, like Isolde, were not just servers, they were often the backbone of the inn. They managed the kitchens, cleaned the rooms, served the patrons, and sometimes even managed the accounts. Many women were innkeepers themselves, especially widows who inherited the business. These women often wielded significant authority in a male-dominated society, navigating complex social dynamics and often dealing with unruly guests. Their presence could, paradoxically, lend an air of civility while simultaneously making them vulnerable to exploitation. Travelers developed their own rules of engagement. They learned to be wary, to conceal their wealth, and to form temporary alliances with fellow travelers. They might choose to sleep near the exit, or keep their luggage tied to their wrist. Some carried daggers for self-defense. For the innkeepers, building relationships with local authorities, even if informal, was often key to survival. They might pay a bribe, offer free drinks, or simply foster a good relationship with a local constable. They had to be diplomats, enforcers, and shrewd business people all at once. The solution was rarely a single definitive action, it was a constant, fluid dance of vigilance and adaptability. The tension between rules and rogues in a medieval inn tells us a profound truth about human nature. It reminds us that even in the most communal spaces, self-interest and danger lurk, but so too do resilience, cunning, and the quiet heroism of those who simply try to maintain order in a chaotic world. It makes us appreciate the layers of trust and security we often take for granted today. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to rely on your instincts to navigate a tricky social situation? Share your wisdom in the comments. Beyond the food, the beds, and the occasional brawl, medieval inns held a far greater significance. They were the beating heart of society, the essential nodes in the vast, interconnected network of medieval life. In a world without widespread literacy, without mass media, and with limited infrastructure, the greatest problem was communication and connectivity. How did news travel? How did goods move from one town to another? How did disparate communities interact? Without a central network, society would fragment. The inn was the answer, however imperfect. Imagine a humble rural alehouse, attached to a farmer's home. Not a grand urban inn, but a place where local gossip was exchanged, where traveling tinkers might mend pots, and where agricultural news, the success of a harvest, the spread of a blight, was shared. A young woman, Mariel, helps her mother run this small establishment. She observes everything, the weary pilgrims sharing tales of distant shrines, the merchants discussing new trade routes, the local farmers grumbling about taxes. She learns about the world not from books, but from the constant flow of humanity through her home. She is a silent archivist of human experience, absorbing the stories, the worries, the dreams of those who pass through. Her small alehouse, often dismissed as insignificant, is in fact a vital artery in the flow of information for her community. Inns were crucial for the movement of goods, people, and ideas. Urban inns often had large courtyards for wagons and stables for horses, serving as logistical hubs for trade. Merchants would conduct business deals in the common room, negotiate prices, and display their wares. The exchange of coins, the bartering of goods, the signing of contracts, much of this happened within the inn's walls. This direct economic impact is difficult to overstate. A well-placed inn could transform a sleepy village into a thriving market town, drawing in merchants and customers, stimulating local economies. Historical records show the proliferation of inns along major pilgrimage routes and trade roads, directly correlating with economic growth in those areas. Beyond trade, inns were crucial for social interaction. They were places where local politics were discussed, where disputes might be mediated or instigated, and where marriages might be arranged. They were informal courts of public opinion, where reputations were made and broken. For women, especially those involved in running the inn, it offered a rare degree of social mobility and economic independence, allowing them to participate actively in the public sphere in ways often denied to other women. The inn, therefore, served as a crucial meeting point for people from all walks of life, fostering a unique form of social cohesion. The solution wasn't something enacted, but something that simply was. The inn served as a natural gathering point, a focal point for communities and a bridge between them. Travelers would seek out inns that were known to be popular, understanding that more traffic meant more news, more opportunities, and often, more safety in numbers. Innkeepers, realizing their central role, would often actively facilitate these connections, sometimes even acting as informal brokers or matchmakers. They understood that their prosperity was intrinsically linked to the flow of people and information through their doors. The medieval inn, for all its grit and grime, was a testament to humanity's enduring need for connection, for stories, and for the simple act of breaking bread with a stranger. It reminds us that even in a world that seems disconnected by vast distances and formidable obstacles, human beings will always find a way to come together, to share, to trade, and to bridge the divides. For all its flaws, the inn connected humanity in a disconnected world, forging invisible bonds across miles and social strata. It's a poignant reminder that even today, in our hyper-connected world, we still seek out places to gather, to share, to belong. Have you ever felt a profound sense of connection in an unexpected place? Tell us about it. So, the next time you step into a bustling hotel lobby or pull over at a roadside motel, take a moment. Close your eyes. Can you smell the wood smoke, hear the murmur of voices, feel the collective heartbeat of weary travelers and watchful innkeepers? The echoes of medieval inns resonate in our modern world, shaping the very concept of hospitality. They were more than just shelters, they were crucibles of culture, engines of economy, and vital arteries of communication. They were places where strangers became temporary companions, where news of distant lands was eagerly devoured, and where the human drama played out in all its messy, magnificent glory. From the questionable stew to the shared bed, from the lurking dangers to the unexpected camaraderie, the medieval inn was a harsh but essential truth of its time. It forced people to confront their vulnerabilities, to adapt, and ultimately, to connect. It reminds us that even in a world seemingly defined by hardship, the human spirit finds ways to gather, to tell stories, to laugh, and to survive. These humble buildings, born of necessity, became the beating heart of their age, shaping trade, spreading ideas, and connecting humanity in a world far more disconnected than our own. Their legacy lives on, a testament to resilience, resourcefulness, and the enduring power of human connection. If this journey through medieval inns stirred your soul, if it made you see history not as a dusty tome but as a living, breathing experience, then share it with a friend. Drop a comment about what surprised you most, What made you laugh, or what made you reflect? Let's keep history alive together by sharing its stories, by understanding its truths, and by marveling at the lives lived long ago. Thank you for traveling with me.